Come on. I'm very glad to be here this evening to discuss this rather sometimes dreary and sometimes interesting subject called alcoholism. My goal this evening is not primarily to tell you about alcoholism, but to perhaps give you a little better insight as to what makes an alcoholic. What is an alcoholic? What is this perception of an alcoholic? You know, alcoholism probably is the longest and least treated illness of the human race. It's been around as long as there's been fermented beverages, over almost 4,000 years. And every society that's had fermented beverages, they always have some record and written record of some people who had unusual reactions to alcohol, who acted differently, who acted strangely. And over the past 30 or 40, 100 years, they've treated alcoholics differently. Sometimes they thought they were possessed by the devil, and sometimes they thought they were insane, and sometimes they thought they were morally depraved, and sometimes they were executed, and sometimes they were put in insane asylums, and sometimes they were deported, and sometimes they were left to die with benign neglect. But midway through this century, something happened to change the thrust a little bit. Halfway through this century, after all these years, the American Medical Association finally classified alcoholism as an illness. And it began an entirely new approach. Well-meaning people trying to plumb this illness to make out what it is and what we can do about it. Probably the first and most major study of alcoholism was made at Yale University in the late 1950s. Became the most important study perhaps of all time. They collected alcoholics of every known type, alcoholics of different backgrounds, sociological backgrounds, economic backgrounds, psychological backgrounds. They gave them tests, they gave them maturity tests, they gave them psychological tests, they gave them drinking tests. And with them they had a control group of non-alcoholics who they would try to measure against to see if they could find out where is the difference. For example, on a given day, they might give the alcoholic 2 drinks and a non-alcoholic 2 drinks and see if they could measure a difference. I've often thought that must have been a rather harrowing test for the alcoholics taking part in that one. Here's your drink, thank you very much. Here's another one, thank you. Well, that's all the test for today. Not for me, it isn't. But they really did a major study on it, and they put out an enormous report. But there wasn't anything concrete. They had a couple things that they found were pretty much in common. For example, they found that for some reason they could not identify, alcoholics seemed to have somewhat of a personality change after drinking small amounts of alcohol. They couldn't understand that. Secondly, one of the funny things about it, all the known alcoholics ranked in the top 5 percentile in perfectionism. They didn't understand that. I don't understand that. Because to me, I'm not a perfectionist. I've always had something of a flair for things to be just right. And if they're not, screw it. But I'm not a perfectionist. I'm just an ordinary guy. There was a theory in the 1950s at one time that it was some sort of a malfunctioning of the endocrine or ductless glands. I don't know what value that was to anybody, but I wish I'd have known that in my drinking days. It would have been something to tell the judge when I was being arraigned, you know. Well, you see, Judge, I have a malfunctioning of my endocrine or ductless gland. If I'd have been able to say it at such a pressing time. There have even been a couple therapies that have said to us that they could return alcoholics to normal drinking. A major hospital in the Northwest that still treats alcoholics, but in the late 1960s came up with the theory that alcoholism is caused by an enzyme imbalance. If they could balance these enzymes, they could drink again. And they had a known alcoholic as their director, and he traveled. I was working at a television station in Hollywood at that time, and he was on our station. And I was impressed because I'd been sober a while and was not doing terribly well. And here was this guy saying, I'm an alcoholic, and with the enzymes, and pick up a drink at the end of his talk and have a martini. And, it didn't bother me. My tongue darted out. I stopped at the 7-Eleven that night to see if they had enzymes. They didn't. And I was just starting to get interested in that subject when unfortunately, this director wound up in a padded cell. And his enzymes did not kick in at the right time, apparently. So they discontinued that promise. Then most of you remember a big famous Santa Monica think tank in the 1970s who made headlines all over the United States and all over the world. Said, alcoholics can drink again. Then there was little type, of course, except those who can't. But it was a great thing. And they did follow-up studies, and it was finally somebody, I believe it was in North Carolina, was piqued. Their curiosity was piqued, and they finally did a follow-up on all these people and found them all drunk and goofy and dead and sick and rotten. And I knew a friend of mine at that corporation. I said, how in the world did you get the idea these people were doing all right? And he told me something that made me chuckle. He said, I don't understand it. We called them up and asked them. I tried to explain to him in my worst days I'd have been able to pass that test. Yeah, still doing all right. There was an evangelical religious hospital outside of Los Angeles that had a great cure, and they made a page and a half in the Los Angeles Times about the 1970s. They established one of their wards as a bar, and they had a bartender and whiskey in there, and these guys would come in sick on the first day. Oh, what are these religious people going to do to me? What do you want, pal? What do you got? Whatever you like. Scotch. Okay. Give them a drink of scotch. Had a little glass with the cord on it so they wouldn't steal a glass. And they'd be a little afraid, probably going to have things in it. Scotch. Can I get another one? You bet. You religious people know how to treat alcoholics, I'll tell you that. And this went on for some time. The guy never had it so good. Then one day he'd go in to have a drink, and just as he drank, they ran an electric current through that cord. No ice this time, Fred. Then you'd have a drink without a shot. Oh, that's more like it. You bet. One more. And from then on, his life was hell. He was like a fawn in a forest fire. And finally the day came when he'd go into the bar and the guy would say, what do you want to drink, pal? Nothing for me. And if he did that 3 days in a row, he was marked down as another cure and released. And they solved everybody's problem until someone did a follow-up. Again, those follow-ups ruin everything. And discovered most of them hadn't got by the first bar. There weren't any wires on the glasses. But all this stuff is fascinating to scientific minds. We hear a lot of studies about it. But it deals with nothing germane to people such as me and perhaps like you, who may be wondering about their own drinking and whether or not I be alcoholic. It doesn't do anything about people who know that their case is different and who know that there's something wrong but don't know what it is. This alcoholism, this disease of perception that enables people to die without ever believing they had it. You know, we get different types of heavy problem drinkers. They become confusing. I always think of them as type C's and type B and type A, but a type C, for example, and there are people like this all over, most alcoholics have heard about them, who are heavy drinkers, heavy problem drinkers, but under sufficient motivation or duress are able to say, hey, I quit. No more for me. And they quit. And they say years later, yes, I drank like that too, but I quit. And look accusingly at people who are sensitive. But they do it. I always think of type B people who become somewhat physiologically dependent on alcohol, and they cannot quit, but they need a doctor's help, medical help to withdraw. That's why some of these hospitals can advertise, if you have a drinking problem, we can help you in 10 days, followed by a 1 follow-up visit. Now, it seems kind of ridiculous to alcoholics, but they have lists and names of successes who are living happily in the world. Then there's the type A people. These drink the same. They apparently drink the same as the other two categories, except something invisible has happened. Somewhere along the line, either with their first drink or thereafter, up to 30 years of drinking, they cross something like an invisible line, and they get to a point in which alcohol is not the problem. And these people are the ones that we discuss and that baffle us and baffle our loved ones and baffle people who try to help us and baffle everyone who is interested in our progress and baffle ourselves most of all. Now, I just said if you're an alcoholic, your problem is not alcohol. That sounds like an incongruity, sounds like some sort of a weird, strange phenomena. But I want to tell you something. As far as I can determine, based on everything I've ever known or learned and the experiences of others and myself, the most important thing I ever learned about my own life, after years of fighting this battle, is this fact. If your problem is alcohol, you are not an alcoholic. And conversely, if you be alcoholic, your problem is not alcohol. But how can that be? That's ridiculous. The problem must be alcohol. I can disprove that in 10 seconds. If the problem is alcohol, detoxes turn out winners. And they don't. Jails turn out winners. Toilets turn out winners. They turn out people who are sober, who are detoxified, who are remorseful and sick. But if they be like me and presume like some of you, you will discover something strange. That without something significant happening, they must always begin to drink again next time. And this is the hard thing to identify, because it seems to render me different. What is this difference between alcohol problems and alcoholism? What is it? Well, we could talk for an hour on that subject, but in one sentence I can define it really, if you be troubled by it. An alcohol problem is overcome by stopping drinking. In this strange, degrading, denigrating, emotionally conflicting, mentally destroying, eventually fatal thing called alcoholism, you will discover sooner or later that stopping drinking has no significant effect on your life other than to gradually make it so painful that you can't stand it. But even that doesn't make you an alcoholic. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who have all the emotions that you and I do, that we think are so unique unto each of us individually, who have extreme sensitivities, extreme, sometimes emotional immaturities, who have obsessive behavior patterns, overly anxious, lonelinesses, fears, despairs, all the things that go to make up this personality. And they're not alcoholic. They are what science calls acute or intense neurotics. They are the people for whom the medications have been devised, the Valiums, the Darvons, all the downers to hold down the conflict. They are the people who fill the psychiatric couches of the world, looking up and saying, "Doctor, why am I different?" The same questions we all ask ourselves. But they will not become alcoholics, because that frame of mind is only a part of this illness. The problem is something called alcoholism. And alcoholism is characterized by something more than being upset emotionally. It seems like in every generation, as far back as history can determine, there are 5 or 6%, perhaps 7% of people who drink alcohol get an unnatural reaction to it. An unnatural reaction that other people don't know they get, and they don't know other people aren't getting. And what is this unnatural reaction? Makes you stay drunk all the time? Nope. There is no human body that can stay drunk 14 straight days and nights in a laboratory. One of the rottenest parts about being a drinker is you must know you keep getting sober again and again and again. Is it that alcoholics can't handle alcohol? False. Tests have indicated that alcoholics handle a given amount of alcohol better than social drinkers. They handle, in fact, alcoholics handle alcohol much better than social drinkers as a rule. Now, a good example of this in California, they set up a program at Christmas time to capture drunken drivers. Arbitrary stops, just approved by the Supreme Court, I'm happy to say. And they're not trying to catch people like me who know how to handle alcohol. They're trying to capture social drinkers who are out at Christmas time having fun. Bumping into trees and cars and freeway overpasses. And they're stopped by these police, highway patrol. So, and decent citizens like me had to sit behind them and say, "Hurry up there." I know how to drink. They don't. Well, is it that alcoholics get bizarre? That must be it. They act bizarre. Not really. Not necessarily. Some people do. But I am in a different position than most of you. Almost on a regular basis, I see alcoholics die. When I say die, I don't mean they're getting sick and I say it looks like he's dying. I mean where we say, put a blanket over this man's face and get him out of here. He's dead. And some of these people have never acted bizarre once. Just the opposite. They become more and more withdrawn, more and more catatonic, till one day they do not move. Is it that alcoholics just don't care? No, I would say that alcoholics care more than most. Then what is it? What does alcohol, for example, do to me that it doesn't do to 95% of the people who drink? Perhaps it does the same to you. And you'll discover it does nothing to me it doesn't do to them. In fact, it does less to me. If they drank as the way I drank, I doubt if they'd have lived. Then what is it? What is this X factor that people are always puzzled about? And it turns out it's something I never would have thought of my own in 1,000 years. It turns out that alcohol does something for me that it doesn't do for most people. It almost instantly alters my perception of reality. It almost instantly changes my relationship to my environment, wherever I may be. It almost instantly makes me taller and more self-contained, and them smaller and less threatening. It almost instantly brings the only technicolor I can find into my life. One of the great problems in my life, drinking and sober, was that sobriety for people like me eventually becomes a gray, black, and white tunnel. And drinking brings what color there is. For many years I've sat at Christmas time and my grandchildren, as they come along, and watch The Wizard of Oz. I've never watched the movie yet. I don't say it anymore because I've become mature. Just the last year or two, actually. But at the end of that movie, I just want to shout, "Dorothy, don't go back to Kansas. It's all black and white in Kansas. It's color here. There may be big wicked witches, but you get used to them. I did. You know, and you'll discover that people who have this change of perception like to travel with other people who have this change of perception. I like to be with people who understand color. When I'm at a bar late at night and somebody says, "Hey, let's go to Tijuana," I want to be with people who say, "Yeah, I'll drive." I don't want to be around some wussy who says, "Why? Look how late it is. I have to be to work at 9. What'll I tell Clara? Tell her to keep you home, you wimp." Later, I may wonder why I made that decision, but when the color is there, it's a golden place. And I would never suggest anyone give up such wonderful times. But you know, the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, there's an interesting thing. Incidentally, the guy who wrote that, Robert Louis Stevenson, died of alcoholism and pneumonia. And he wrote the story about the people whose personality changed, and this guy whose personality changed. And his wife asked him, reputed to have asked him, "Robert, where did you get this idea?" And he said, it came to me in a dream. And I thought to myself, well, I bet it did, Robert. But the problem with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was not that he became this other creature. That was fun. I mean, after you go see the movie, would you rather be sitting in your office or ever beating the heck out of Ingrid Bergman? Whap, whap. Yumpanimony, shut up. It was had a chance for a little creative evil. And I identify with that because people with a good background as I have always feel a little conscience stricken about being evil. It's nice to find a beverage that removes that I've had nothing but training in being good, and I have no natural ability for it. I've never had any training for evil, and I've got a flare that won't stop. But the thing that made Dr. Jekyll's life hell and eventually cost him his life, he lost control of when he would go over. That's when the trouble came. And that's when the trouble comes with people like you and me. When I don't intend to go over, and I do. And the times come when the problems begin to mount, and drinking starts to become a problem. This great escape from this dull, draggy reality becomes a problem. So now I've got to quit. And I quit, and I discover the problems are even more intense now. And the time must come when I must drink, but this time to control it, hopefully. But I can't stay drinking. I've got to become sober. Till I have to drink, till I have to stay sober, till I have to drink. And this strange phenomenon is something called alcoholism. Alcoholism is the condition that exists when people no longer can tolerate drinking and cannot tolerate sobriety. And that's why today, even today, with all the help available, hospitals, treatment facilities, programs, there never has been a civilization in the world with more help for alcoholics than in America in 1990. And it is estimated today that still maybe something over 90% of alcoholics in America die drunk, or from the direct cause of alcohol. And they die almost always with the same cry on their lips: "But I'm not really an alcoholic. My problems came when I was sober. I'm not a drinker, I'm a feeler. You think my problem is drinking? Come to my bedroom some night at 2 o'clock in the morning. You can watch me lie awake and look off in the darkness with my head going 100 miles an hour, wondering what happened to my life, and why are my children this way, and why has my marriage gone bad, and why do people treat me funny, and why do I have this anxiety?" And you might begin to understand, my problem isn't alcohol. My case is different. And they have no idea that they are outlining the disease of alcoholism. They are giving a graphic description of it. Probably the best concrete example I had of that was when I was early in my sobriety, a guy was helping me, trying to get me back in business. And I had a little job in an advertising agency wrapping packages. I had been an award-winning writer, but through a series of bad breaks and misunderstandings, I'd lost my job, my family, my home, and my front teeth. You can get new families and homes, but front teeth are one-time items, I'll tell you. But one of our accounts was something called Kamchatka vodka. And they had a billboard they'd been using for 10 years at that time. This was 1959. Hackneyed already. It said, vodka is pronounced Kamchatka. And I came by one day and I thought, I'm going to make my move. I'm going to tell these people that even a guy without front teeth can give them an idea, and they'll say, who is that man? And I said, I've got an idea for the billboard. I said to the account executive and the art director, instead of that old slogan, why don't we say, Kamchatka vodka goes boom, better than any vodkas anywhere. And they all looked up and had the same look I've been getting all my life, just. And one guy says, you talk bad and you look bad. Why don't you, if you don't like wrapping packages here, go wrap packages somewhere else. And that night I was just about crazed. And I was telling my friend about this. And he said, shut up. He explained, shut up, listen. They're not persecuting you. They're not putting you down. Here's something I've been telling you for almost a year. Can't you get this through your head? They don't know what the hell you're talking about. Kamchatka vodka to them doesn't go boom. To them, Kamchatka vodka goes bleh. That's why you're here talking to me and they're not. Oh, I said, I knew that. But to those of you who might be watching this tape, or people in this audience, it has always been to me a great test for people who think, am I really an alcoholic, or am I just a situational drinker, or have I just been put upon by fate, or has my life been a series of bad breaks and misunderstandings, or what is it? Think of it this way. When your back's to the wall, as all of us ours are sometimes, and the hounds of fate are ripping at your throat, and you take a drink, do you really want the drink to go? No more for me, I'm starting to feel it. Is that what you want? I don't think you're an alcoholic. But if you have a reaction like mine, you'd better think about it. When your back's to the wall and the hounds of fate ripping at your throat, and you take a drink, and it doesn't go, it goes. Bring on your damned hound, Mrs. Baskerville. Nothing happens but the perception changes immeasurably. It's hard to understand, but my emotions govern my perception. So somehow I have to find a way to overcome this. But the biggest problem I have had, and the biggest problem any person like me ever has, is coming to the acknowledgement, to the surrender that I am in need of help at this level. Surrender is a foreign word, especially to people who have deep-seated feelings of being different, because it seems to make you more different. And the reason I'm talking about this today is because I'm trying to help you understand that your case is not different. These are the symptoms and the causative factors that cause people like you and me to die and never know why. When in reality, this deadly disease, this long-term illness, this frightful ruiner of lives, can only be addressed after I say, I surrender. I've got it. And that's the hardest decision you will make. Because once you do that, the battle is half won. then you can seek help. You can seek effective help. And there's help everywhere. Some very, very successful help. But none of these things can happen until you surrender. Now you might say to yourself, well, that's what he's talking about. He works in a big place on Skid Row. He sees Skid Row alcoholics. I'm not like that. I work in Skid Row, but the alcoholics I work with aren't out on Skid Row, most of them. Over the years, I've had a chance to watch these same principles happen to people who've been on the moon and people who are multimillionaires who could buy any sort of happiness if there were any available in this conflict, and movie stars and clergymen. It's interesting when people say, I'm not going to seek help, I'm going to seek my clergyman. I've been a couple times flown across the country to talk to a big house where they send alcoholic clergymen from all over the country because they need help and they have to go there to surrender. There is no human body. If you are in this 5 or 6 or 7%, it makes no difference if you are a plumber or a movie star or a senator or a governor or a ditch digger. The situation comes about when life is intolerable. The unnatural reaction that happens, that is always a bafflement to the patient and always a bafflement to those around him. If you be like me, or if you have any identification with what I've said tonight, let me say this. I assure you, knowing what's wrong with you will not make it better. Learning all about the hallmarks of the illness will not make it better. Having a complete amount of data on alcoholism and what brings it about will change nothing in your life. What people like you and me must do, we must surrender to the fact that this condition exists. And then we can find help, and only then can find help that can literally, once more, alter my perception of reality. Till that day comes, there's no hope. It will be necessary to have a long-term solution. It's a long-term program, and no 10 days, no 30 days, no 1 year will make it better. A long-term solution will enable you to do it. But if you do it, I can tell you on behalf of hundreds of thousands of people who have felt just like you, that there's a way out. I hope that you can surrender and begin to find it. I hope that one day your hopelessness will return to hope, as mine did. That your helplessness will enable you to be of help to others, as mine has. I hope you can find peace. I wish you well. God bless you. Thank you.